a bird!
It's a plane!
It's
books.
Yo, what is going on? Thank you so much for joining in. So, the fantasy genre. This is a genre that has a special place in my heart because it's also the genre that sparked my love for reading. So if you're anywhere near my age, you probably grew up with books like Harry Potter or Aragon, taking you on a magical and dragon-filled adventure, allowing you to escape the harsh realities of being a 10 or 12-year-old. Adventure, wonder, and magic are the three things that sparked my love for reading as a kid, but those same three things, adventure, wonder, and magic, still hold to this day as to why I think the fantasy genre is just so enjoyable for me to read. Now that I'm older though, let's add a few more things as to why I think the fantasy genre is so appealing. With that being, epic grand scale battles, complex magic systems, intricate political systems, monstrous beasts that induce nightmares, and buckets and buckets of blood. It's really almost endless as what you can expect within a fantasy book, and I also think that's the main reason why fantasy books are so popular. So getting to the point in this video, man, what are my top 10 fantasy books of all time? Well, you are in luck because I'm going to answer that question here. And a quick note too, I'm only selecting one book per author in this list. So sorry guys, we're not going to have Stephanie Meyer's Twilight series reigning supreme in my top 4 slots. Sorry about that. So if you're ready, let's dive into it. Alright, starting off really strong, we're going to start on the urban side of the fantasy spectrum, with that being Grave Peril, book number 3 in the Dresden Files. I'm a huge fan of this series, starting back all the way from book number 1 being Stormfront, which I thought had an amazing, very compelling character, being Harry Dresden, that had fun action scenes and overall a fun and engaging plot. Grave Peril is actually the latest spot that I'm currently in the Dresden Files, and I hear from a few different people that the first 3 books in this series are actually the weakest entries in that series, which I find to be very interesting because if that's the case, I am in very good hands because I loved Grave Peril. I think this book really stepped it up in terms of the overall narrative, keeping the same elements that I loved from the first 2 books, while introducing new ones that only deepened my love for the series in Harry Dresden, the character. Harry Dresden is one of my favorite characters in the fantasy genre just because of how realistic this guy feels while at the same time being complex, continuing to grow, someone that has real struggles where not everything is just handed to him on a silver platter. There is so much depth here to this character and we're only 3 books in. I'm not going to go into any of the plot details within this discussion to avoid any spoilers, but what I will tell you is that it had vampires, ghosts, and demons all wrapped up in an exhilarating story that I cannot wait to dive back into again. Alright, taking my number 9 spot is going to be The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is book number 2 in an ongoing series called the Bloodsworn Saga, and the first thing I have to say here is, damn, look at this cover. It's absolutely stunning, and I think that's like the definition of what fantasy should look like right here. And for you guys who have not read this series just yet, this is a Norse-inspired epic tale that is full of action, power, blood, magic, and ancient gods. This story starts off right where we left off in book number 1, and the ending of book number 1, we did not leave off in a good spot for our main characters, which I am not going to spoil here. What I love most about this series is just the characters that Gwynne has crafted here within this story that I simply cannot get enough of. I think this will be a common trend in a lot of people's review of this book, but there's a character named Orca in this series. She's basically one of the best written characters in the fantasy genre, hands down. It is almost impossible to not emphasize with this character and feel for this character as she is going on one of the most epic quests of revenge, searching for her child. Additionally, we still get to follow 2 other characters that we had in the first series being Varg and Elvar, where I became way more invested in these 2 in the second book. We also got a couple new POVs in this story that are 100% welcome because they added to the overall immersion and the story building within this series. Also, the end of the story was absolutely insane, and I'm super excited for the next series to come out, which is hopefully very soon. Alright, book number 8 for me is going to be The Blinding Night by Brent Weeks, which is book number 2 in the Lightbringer series. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings on this series, especially after book number 3, but I stuck it out. I read all 5 books in the series, and overall, I really enjoyed it, and I consider it to be one of my favorites now in the series, as you can tell with this being in my top 10. What's interesting is that this series, I might have the physical books on me, but I've actually never read it physically. I've only listened to this book through the audiobook format, which I've done twice. I've listened through the series 2 times because it was just that good. The narrator for the version I listened to was Simon Vance, who did an incredible job. Now the reason why I chose The Blinding Knife out of the whole entire series is a few reasons. I'm absolutely enamored with the magic system within this universe. And for you guys who have no clue what I'm talking about, basically some people have an ability to use light as a source of power and manipulate it into a physical substance known as Luxin. If that's not cool enough, it gets even more complex than that, as Luxin exists in 7 different colors, each with their own unique properties, and people are lucky to be able to control 1 of these colors. Then we get some punks out here that can control not only 1, but 2, and all the way to 7 colors at the same time. I love book 2 because we got to expand on the magic system even more compared to book number 1, where book number 1 is more or less like a teaser into what the capabilities were of this magic, where book number 2 really expanded on that. And from here, we got a ton of character growth from our main character being Kip, who I slowly connected with more and more throughout this story. Then there was this whole academy setting where our main character actually struggled and overcame challenges. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons why I love this series, but I can go on and on and on about this series. But for now, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Are you serious? This is torture. You're torturing me and everyone else watching. Wait.
I now call this courtroom in session by declaring my book number 7 being The Tyranny of the Fates by Richard Swan. This is book number 2 in an ongoing series called Empire of the Wolf, with book number 3 actually coming out here very soon, I think in March of next year or even February. I also have to say that the artwork in this series is absolutely stunning, with book number 1 and book number 2 really pulling you into this world that we call Sova within this series. And for you guys who do not know what this series is all about, it revolves around a traveling justice who is a detective, a judge, and an executioner all in one, where he's traveling the land enacting the laws of the king while also having Jedi-like mind control powers, being able to talk to the dead, and other arcane magic that only adds layers and layers of intense depth to this overall story. I really enjoyed the story as we got to explore more of this world from a different environment, that being the capital of this world in Sova. There was more politics in this one, or at least I should say that we were able to see more of the political system within this universe. It was also interesting to see that the definition of what is right, varied from person to person, even including some of our main characters. I love the characters in this book, and their interactions just felt so realistic while complex at the same time, with layers and layers of subtext between the lines. Also, my favorite element within this series was explored a lot more heavily in book number 2 compared to book number 1, with that being on the arcane, supernatural magic side of things, immersing us into a demonic-filled world that makes me feel like I'm in an Upside Down from Stranger Things. Also, the end of this book is the definition of a page turner, and I am more than excited to check out book number 3 and see the conclusion of this trilogy, because the ending of book number 2 was insane. No man is above the law. Also, if you're enjoying the video so far, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, as I would really appreciate it. We have some amazing and fun bookish content coming out here pretty soon, which I would love for you to join in on. Alright, back to the video. Okay, you know I had to get some vampires into this list, right? So, book number 6 is going to be Twilight by Stephanie Myers.
Huh?
For real though, it has to go to Empire the Vampire by Kristoff. I'm a huge Kristoff fan now, completing the entire Nevernight series, and also, of course, Empire the Vampire. In this story, we finally get to see a modern take on vampires, not put into a teenage romance type of narrative, where vampires, are,
Scary?
This is in a post-apocalyptic world where the sun is continually dimmed, putting us into a state of just continual darkness, where vampires reign supreme with only pockets of humanity put on the brink of desperate survival. And we follow our main character, which is Gabriel de Leon, who is the last Silver Saint, which is a half vampire, half human, who has supernatural abilities in the hope to help humanity fight off the evil hordes of vampires. And this story is told from 2 different distinct perspectives, with one being our main character being super young, and another one being our main character being a little bit older, more of an adult. Both these timelines I deeply enjoyed, especially his younger self, as we got to get to one of my favorite fantasy tropes, being an academy setting, which I am a complete sucker for. The action in this book is 100% violent, the plot is incredibly interesting and compelling, and there was a distinct emotional depth to this story that I was not expecting. And vampires are just plain cool. One more thing too is that this story comes with fantastic artwork that really helps get you immersed into the dark and gritty world within this book. I mean, look at that. That's crazy, right? A life without books is a life not lived. Book number 5 is actually my only indie book on this list, and I really hope to change that in the future as I continue to read more and more indie books. With that being said, book number 5 for me has to go to The Horns of Grief by E.J. Doble. This is hands down one of my favorite reads of this year, and I cannot recommend it enough. The first thing I have to say here is that the covers, man, they really work for me, and they really paint a good picture of the overall tone to expect within the world within this series. And this crazy looking horned skeleton beast over here might be something that you might see within the story. Again, this is book number 2 in an ongoing series called the Blood and Steel Saga, coming right off of book number 1, being the Fangs of War, which I also love. So what is this story all about? Well, we actually follow two warring factions that have a long history of violence toward each other, both aiming for ultimate control. We follow an amazing cast of distinct characters that are on both sides of this war, as we are placed front and center in the middle of the chaos, violence, brutal action, and gallons of blood. The characters in the story are very remarkable, with one of my highlights being Revok. For you guys who do go pick up this book, which I highly recommend that you do, you will be able to meet a nefarious, power-lusting individual that has some of the best inner dialogue scenes that I've ever read in a fantasy book before. These inner dialogue scenes are both revolting, but at the same time hilarious, as it's just so comical to read. Also, this book had some of the best prose I've read this year as well, with the words just flowing so beautifully. The action in this book is relentless and pulse-pounding. The scope of the world only grows in book number 2, and again, the characters are all very compelling. There's also a layer of magic in this world, where in book number 2, we really expand on it heavily compared to book number 1, and there's just so much potential, and I'm ready to see even more of it in book number 2.5, which I think comes out in August of this year. But what we did see in terms of magic in book number 2 was bloody awesome. The last third of this book was a blast of action and completely surprised me every turn of the page. I also have a full written review on this book on my blog, so if you're interested in learning more about the Horns of Grief and the Blood and Steel saga, go check out that review. So you know I had to have Brent and Sanderson somewhere on this list, right? Well, you were right, because book number 4 goes to Words of Radiance by, again, Brent and Sanderson. This is book number 2 in an ongoing series called The Stormlight Archive. This is a beefy book coming in over 1,000 pages, and I love about every single page of it. The first book, being The Way of Kings, was a fantastic introduction to the world of Roshar, where Words of Radiance only expanded on that already built out world, introducing us into new areas and building on more of what we already loved from the first book. This book also helped establish Shallan being one of my favorite characters within the series, where in the first book I was a little bit more indifferent towards her in that first series, but that completely changed in book number 2. Also, I cannot get enough of Kaladin and Dalinar, and when they converge and finally get together and have those scenes of dialogue while they're talking back and forth with each other are some of my favorite dialogue scenes within any book. The action in this book had me on the edge of my seat, turning the page as fast as my eyes would allow. This book also had one of my favorite arena duel scenes in any book I've ever read, and I continually think back on it, months and months down the road. We also get to explore more of the magic system within book number 2, and it only gets more interesting as bonds grow and become anew. There are just so many individual epic moments in this book that made it overall one of my favorite fantasy reads ever. Alright, here we are, the bronze, silver, and gold medals of my list here today. Taking the bronze medal is going to be book number 3, The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is book number 1 in an ongoing series called The Burning, which is one of the best stories of revenge I have ever read. What's crazy, this is also Winter's debut novel that completely blew me out of the water. Or should I say, burnt me out of the water. This is actually another story that I've only read through the audio version, which was amazing as the narrator was exceptional. This is an African-inspired fantasy tale of revenge and the extent that people will go to in order to enact that revenge. It starts off super strong with an action-packed prologue that sets up an incredibly immersive world of war and violence. In the story, we follow our main character being Tau as he navigates a unforgiving world of a caste system, with him being on the lower tier of the spectrum. Tragedy is brought upon his family, and he dedicates the rest of his remaining life to becoming the best swordsman the world has ever seen. Tau is another character that's one of my favorites in the fantasy genre, and him and his group of pals together are some of my favorite moments in this story, where I continually think back on time and time again. Winter's prose is also fantastic, making you feel right in the action with Tau as he's traveling to hell and back, learning to fight the demons inside his mind and also in another dimension. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a quartet with 2 more books still to come out, and I'm excited. Alright, my silver medal goes to a book that came out this year in 2023, with that book being The Will of the Many by James Islington. I'm a huge fan of the Lakeland trilogy, which is also by James Islington, so I knew I had to pick this one up when it came out, and I basically inhaled it as soon as it arrived on my doorstep. The Will of Many is the first book in an ongoing series called The Hierarchy, and from the very first page, Islington crafts a beautiful world that is massive and intricate, and I simply cannot wait to dive back into it. So if you are a fan of an academy setting, this might be the best execution of it that I've ever seen. The magic system here is incredibly unique, and actually requires a little bit of math to fully understand it, but luckily, Islington provides many situations from the academy setting and catastrophic events that helps you get a good sense of the scale of the magic found within this world. The character development within the story is also exceptional, as you get to see an almost full picture as to why Viz, our main character, is the way he is while still leaving us with a little bit of mystery to speculate on. Also, if you've read the Lakeland trilogy, you know Islington is preparing us for some mind-bending twists that sometimes pays off books down the road. I will say that The Will of the Many is pretty straightforward until you get to the end, especially the epilogue. That epilogue is just mind-shattering. I cannot wait to reread this book, as I'm sure there are so many little things I have missed that hopefully I can pick up on my next read. Stronger together, read The Will of the Many. And here we are. Drum roll, please. My gold medal goes to one of the best written books in the fantasy genre, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree with me.
Bow before your king! Bow, you shits!
With that book being A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. Well, I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that are upset with the later seasons of the Game of Thrones series, and we're still waiting on the next book to come out within the series, but there is no denying that this book is just masterful writing. George R.R. Martin basically crafted a story here that is just the definition of epic fantasy. Even though I came to this book after watching the show, like a lot of people did, I was still questioning what was going to happen next while reading through this book. This book is absolutely massive, but somehow still has no dull moments where each page is utilized to the max. I was fully immersed into the world of Westeros within this read. Amazing, fleshed out characters, epic battles, remarkable scenes that are constantly brought up in terms of being a gold standard in the fantasy genre, and finally a plot that thickens and only becomes more and more suspenseful. This book is just simply everything that I want out of a fantasy story, and I love it. Alright, and there we have it, my top 10 fantasy books of all time, and I cannot wait to see how this list ebbs and flows as I continue to read more books in the fantasy genre. So what are your top 10 fantasy books? Are any of mine on your list too? If you're sticking around this long, you've earned 1 XP token, and if you're already a subscriber, you get an extra XP token, so here you go. Whoa, 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 whoa. Do you see this right here? We have new BiblioTheory tokens in the house. Also, I know some of you guys have been watching for a little bit now, so you might have like a pile of tokens sitting on your bedside. So do not worry, something is coming very soon. And that is all I have for you today, so have a good one. Keep reading. Peace.